CANNIBALCORPSE.com. Welcome to another exciting interview. I am stoked to talk to the mastermind, the brains of, well, just the metal community as a whole, bringing together the epitome of the word community. Brian Slagel, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
The brains, the brawn, the spine, the everything that holds together, I think, the metal community, not just with Metal Blade Records, this outstanding label that has just, I think, has been an extremely important anchor in the metal world from the 80s, all the Metal Massacre compilations, all the great bands that have their legacy with you. Just I'm sorry I'm taking up all this intro, but yeah, Brian, thanks for joining us today.
Of course, like I said, thanks for having me. And thanks for the nice intro there.
Today we're talking about your new book, kind of a part two in the series. Who knows if there'll be a part three? Swing of the Blade. I unfortunately have only gone about an eighth of the way through. There's a lot of great information that I like just rereading. So far, it's been talking about the reawakening of vinyl. This whole vinyl reawakening. How has it opened your eyes, or tell us your perspective of it all now?
Well, it's been amazing from for a variety of reasons. Number one, just because I grew up with vinyl and I always loved vinyl, and was very very upset when it went away. In fact, in the first book, what I was kind of talking about when Metal Blade almost went under, was I was like, vinyl's never leaving, it's never going away. And then within 1 week, every record store in the entire world basically shipped all the vinyl back, and yeah, that was not good. So having it come back around has been amazing, and it's so much fun for us to do the reissues and different colors and different designs. And I think the quality of the vinyl too, as a fan myself, I think the quality of the vinyl is so much better. It's like back in the day we used to hear clicks and pops and all that sort of stuff a
Mm.
lot. You don't really hear that hardly at all anymore on a lot of the new stuff.
Really? Oh, wow.
So yeah, so that's been fun. But I mean, it's been, like I said, it's been amazing as a fan, and just as a label to be able to reissue so many cool things. And obviously the fans out there love it because they're buying up everything. So that's
Hmm.
good on the business side.
Right.
So yeah, it's been all around. It's been fantastic.
That's outstanding. And it's so good that the demand is, as far as the demand being there, the actual supply, all these manufacturing plants that do this, it's kind of hard for them to keep up, correct?
Yeah, it's been a challenge. It's a little bit easier for us now because there are a few more plants that are online, and we've got deals with kind of quite a few different plants. So we're not having the amount of difficulty that we had, like, let's say 2 3 years ago, when it
Mhm.
was really really tough. And then obviously the pandemic didn't make it any easier. But we've kind of gotten to a point now where we haven't had too many issues in making a lot of vinyl. The only issue we really have is just the lead times. It just takes so long from the time you say, okay, we're going to do this, and here's all the parts, to when we finally get the vinyl in, just because it just takes time. And that's just the
Yeah.
way it's kind of always been.
Yeah. What's the time frame, like, kind of average from, like, you're planning to release vinyl. When do you have to put that order in to get that turnaround?
Yeah, so from the time we deliver all the parts, and the parts meaning the artwork and the lacquers or whatever they're using to actually make the vinyl, you're looking anywhere from 4 to 6 months. It just
Oh,
depends on the release and a whole variety of factors, but it's kind of there now. That's better than it was a while ago when it was probably 6 to 8 months or even a year. So we've cut it down, but it's still a long time frame, which is I think funny to some people, because with the digital stuff, you basically can put it up in 30 days because you're not manufacturing
all
anything. But
right,
with
right.
vinyl, it takes a lot longer. So that's always tricky when you're putting out a new release. If we don't have the vinyl, then a lot of times we have to say, well, the vinyl will be here on this day, but you can order the record now, but you will get your vinyl later. Just be patient.
Hmm. And I think a big part of that is just this amazing artwork. I mean, as a kid, I mean, I unfortunately didn't get into the vinyl collection yet. I do plan on getting a record player as soon as I find a nice one. But I remember as a kid going with my brother to record stores, or even his small vinyl collection, just the artwork itself. Number of the Beast, Iron Maiden. That was like, as a kid, I'm like, wow. this what is I don't know what it is, but I want to check it out. And I think that still holds true to this day. You have to have that artwork. It's this physical aspect of it all, I think, is a big deal.
100%. I mean, especially with metal, because the artwork is so important anyway.
Yes.
To be able to have it on a big scale is great, and because I love digital, and it certainly has a place for everything, but it is a bummer that you can have huge artwork that you can hold in your hands. And I
Mhm.
think, I mean, the stats are, and they vary a lot, but apparently, anywhere from 30 to 50% of the people who buy vinyl now don't even have a record player. They just buy it for the
Oh,
artwork and the lyrics and all the cool stuff of
yeah.
holding it in your hand, which is
Yeah.
interesting.
It's a collection piece because it's also a limited quantity that you make available, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we do everything pretty limited. But I don't know that there's a massive, it's not like we're doing limited amounts and then people are clamoring for it. It just depends on what it is.
Right, right. Now, we're talking Swing of the Blade, the new book by Brian Slagel, Metal Blade Records here, the brains behind it all. Let's kind of go back in time a little bit. Start with the 80s, and what was it that was going on around you that kind of this lit, triggered you and lit this fire to like get into the metal world?
Well, I was a big music fan growing up as a kid, especially when I got to high school. I just kind of went crazy going to concerts, and I would basically just go to concerts and do my homework and listen to music. That was pretty much all I really did. Played a little bit of sports, and that was all. But I was a tape trader when I was a kid, meaning that I would go tape concerts and trade them to other people around the world and whatnot. I sold a little bit of them. But all
Hmm.
the money that I made, I put back into the business by buying a lot of vinyl.
There you go.
But as I was trading, one of my friends in Sweden sent me an AC/DC live tape from 1978, and he said, "Hey, there's this new band from England that just put out something called the Soundhouse tapes. I put it on the end of this tape. You might like it." And that was Iron Maiden. And when I heard that, that literally changed my life right there. I was like, "Oh my gosh, what is this? I've never heard anything this amazing up until that point." So figured out who they were, and got as much information as I could, which 1980 and Los Angeles was not very easy because we didn't have the internet or anything. But I
Mhm.
was able to get Sounds Magazine and some of these other magazines that were available in England. That, thank goodness, some of the record stores in LA carried, and I just got into that whole new wave of British heavy metal scene. And I loved every aspect of it. I love the music, I love the imagery, I love the fact that it was kind of do it yourself, thing, and that really
Mhm.
inspired me to start a fanzine in called the New Heavy Metal Review in 1981. That I ended up getting to work in a record store, which is a dream job of my life. And I was able to bring in a lot of the vinyl. Then I found out that there were actually metal bands in Los Angeles, which I had no idea at that point. Started to see some of them, and the scene in LA back then, there was a lot of metal bands in LA, and no one
Oh
cared.
yeah. Mhm.
A&R people didn't care, nobody cared. So I felt that if I didn't try to do something to promote this, that nothing would ever happen with it. So that kind of where the idea of doing the first compilation album that you have very nicely on your shirt there came about, and that's kind of what started the whole thing.
Really amazing, and it's kind of started a wave of American heavy metal in a sense, and I really respect that idea that you have of like you mentioned the tapes, and then reinvesting into this love that you have for music, and that is something that I think is really really important nowadays. It's like you got to really give back, and I'll be honest, like this is why I love what I do. Besides getting to talk to like amazing people like you, one of my first interviews starting with KNEC was with Rob Halford. I get to talk to these people and really like pick their brain. And I think you really need to be involved in the scene like you have over the years, over the decades. Such amazing accomplishments with Metal Blade Records, all the amazing bands from Cannibal Corpse, now up to Black Dahlia Murder. Um, Again, let's stick with the 80s. What kind of bands stick out in your mind as the ones that help kind of guide you through the 80s?
Well, certainly, the big four obviously were a big part of it: Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, and Megadeth. So those bands were just forming, and we had a part, I guess, of three of the four. Obviously, we did Metallica, and Dave Mustaine was on the first Metal Massacre, and then of course Slayer came shortly after that. And those bands really from my perspective and kind of from the American side of things, were the ones that kind of really blew it up. There's so many great bands that came out in the 80s. And obviously, my favorite band's always been Iron Maiden. So, anything that they do is amazing. And they obviously released, some of the best albums that ever came out in the 80s. So there's a lot of stuff. But it was interesting because when we started in the early 80s, everything was new and independent, and then it kind of exploded. And then the major labels got involved, and that wasn't really the best thing for the scene, because they, quite honestly, towards the end of the 80s, ruined it. And then you had grunge come in that kind of killed it for a while, but we survived, and here we are still today.
Totally. Now let's move on to the 80s and Metal Blade Records. What were some of the bands that you felt really captured the 90s sound?
Well, the 90s were interesting, because we went for the 80s, and we had, so many bands that did so well in the 80s, Barbara Saint, Fates Warning, and, on and on. And those bands coming into the 90s were poised to, we thought, to be very popular bands. And, we released, 2 records that, to this day, I'm very proud of, that we both thought were going to be really big, was Symbol of Salvation by Armored Saint and Parallels by Fates Warning. And unfortunately, those came out in like 1991. And in 1991, pretty much that was Nirvana, and that whole grunge scene, crushed the metal scene, probably rightfully so at that point. But it was really disappointing, because we had a relationship with Warner Brothers at the time, so we were with a major label, and we had these 2 records that we felt, could be really big records, and they both did well, but not kind of what the expectations that we all had for them. But then, but you look back on it now, and it was a real bummer. But both of those bands continue today and are still making really great music today, and still playing shows. And so it's more of a marathon than a sprint. But then you cut to kind of the mid 90s, where metal was really thought of as being dead. In fact, I think it was Rock Hard magazine, which is a very famous magazine in Germany, that had the cover was a tombstone, like saying heavy metal, born 1969, died 1996, or whatever the date was. It's kind of scary. But the 90s were, in the words of my friend Carrie King, weird. But the underground was great. I mean, we had Gwar, we had 6 Feet Under, we had Cannibal Corpse, we had Merciful Fate, we had King Diamond, and all of those bands were making really good records and selling lots of records in the underground in the 90s. It just, the mainstream just didn't know anything about it and didn't care. So I always talk a lot about the 90s, because there are so many really great underground records that came out then that people might overlook today, especially like the Merciful Fate stuff and some of these other things that came out. Obviously, death metal was kind of the big deal that happened in the 90s. It was probably the perfect time for it to come out, to kind of combat everything else and be super heavy. But for us, those bands were really good. And like I said, there's a lot of really good music that came in the 90s. We had King's X and Galactic Cowboys and a whole variety of things that were really good. It didn't get a lot of attention because metal was dead.
Right. So here's a little curveball that I'll throw at you. Where does Goo Goo Dolls come into the play?
Yeah, so we are in the 80s, I guess mid 80s at this point. Slayer had a band called DRI opening up for them, the punk rock band from San Francisco. And I also heard one of our A&R guys heard this band Corrosion Conformity out of North Carolina. And both of these bands I thought were tremendous. They both had one album that they had put out at the point. So I wanted to work with both of them. And they were both like, we'd love to work with you, but we can't be on a metal label. Because at that point, punk and metal were not friends at all. So if you were a punk band, you couldn't be on a metal label, and vice versa. But I thought these bands were great, and I wanted to work with them. I said, well, what about if we started another label? We called it something else, which we called Death Records. And it wasn't a metal label, it was a punk label. And they all said, sure. So we ended up signing all of those bands, and Dr. No and the infamous Mentors and the Goo Goo Dolls. So William Howell, who, probably know on KNAC, DJ Will, was working for us at the time. And he had found... he had heard the first Goo Goo Dolls record, and also Mike Faley, who works for us, who's from Buffalo, knows everything at Buffalo. So we had heard about them from him, and we talked about them. And at that point, they were just a fun punk band. They actually opened for Cannibal Corpse a couple times back in the day too. So we found them, and they thought they were really, really cool punk band. Signed them, started working with them, and they were kind of getting bigger and bigger. We thought they were kind of going to get big, and then we had a relationship with Warner Brothers, and they were putting a lot of money into it. And then out of left field, on A Boy Named Goo, which was the first big record, there's a song on there called Name, which is an acoustic song that they had written it's kind of an afterthought really to be on the record. And Kevin Weatherly, who was the DJ at K-Rock in LA, and at this point, like anything he played turned to gold pretty much. So he decided one night to play Name to see what the reaction was. The reaction went through the roof, and within like 2 months, the band had a gold record. It was crazy. And then I think they kind of pivoted because then Iris came out then. So they're looked at now as kind of this, very mellow, active, whatever the term you want to use as a now are. But they start off as punk. And I was listening to, I was watching the Super Bowl, Sunday Night Football a few years ago. And I heard the Bills were playing, of course, Buffalo Bills. And I was like, oh, I think they just played the Goo Goo Dolls. So I rewound it. And they did, but it was like an older Goo Goo Dolls track I think something off of Superstar Car Wash. And I had listened to that record for years, but I didn't listen to it. It's a great record. It sounds almost exactly like the Foo Fighters. I was like, whoa, Dave Grohl, hey, maybe some influence there. But yeah, they were a great punk rock band. And if people are into punk rock, go back and look at some of the early videos on YouTube of them, and you'll see they were just a fun, dirty little punk rock band that became these huge, mega mellow rock stars, I guess.
Very interesting, crazy. I think I'm gonna have to visit some of that Google Dolls and see what's going on with that.
Old stuff, the new stuff's not bad too, but it's a different style. But the old stuff's great.
Very cool. Now let's kind of flip the coin here and talk about one of the heaviest artists you have on the label, and Cannibal Corpse. They've had a stable relationship with you from the word go, and they've definitely, evolved, after Chris left and then Corpse Grinder coming into the fold. Their artwork has always been something of some of the best artwork ever around, honestly, from Butchered at Birth to Mutilated to like Vile and stuff. Tell us a little bit about the relationship that you have with Cannibal Corpse.
Well, we kind of, in all honesty, missed out on the whole death metal scene. I just wasn't, when it was coming up, I wasn't, it wasn't that I wasn't a fan. I just wasn't like as into it as a lot of the other labels. So credit, Relapse and Nuclear Blast and some of the other labels that came in that signed a lot of those bands. So, we kind of missed the boat a little bit on that. But then again, the Buffalo connection with Goo Goo Dolls as well. With Cannibal Corpse, we had I think Mike Felly had one of the guys he talked to said, hey, there's a local band that's really good, here's their demo tape, you guys should check it out. So we walked into my office and he kind of told me about it. So I looked at this demo tape and I looked at the song titles and I said, I don't really care what this sounds like. We're going to sign this because there was a song on there called A Skull Full of Maggots. That was like one of the best songs I was ever heard in my entire life. I don't care what this song is. Awesome. Luckily, the demo was good, and we ended up signing them. And yeah, we've had they've been with us since day one, and they're honestly one of the easiest bands to work with. They're all good friends of mine, and they're in the however many years we've been working together, we might have had one or two disagreements, which is pretty rare. So they're great, and it's it's really. The one thing about Metal Blade that I really like is the fact that, not just the bands, but even employees, people have been there for, 30 years, 20 years, 15 years. I think, most of our employees have all been there so long, and so have the bands. So, I think that that's something that I really take to heart, is that, we love working with these bands, and it's such an honor for us to be able to, keep working with bands like Cannibal Corpse and Amon Amarth, and all these bands that we've had for their entire career. It's been a really good relationship on both sides. And the Cannibal guys, it's been an interesting run, obviously, because of all the controversy with the album covers and the lyrics, and they've been banned in Germany, they've been banned in Australia, they've been banned in Korea,
Disney, I think too. Like I think
probably
the House of Blues in Orange County.
Yeah, and it's funny because they're really like the nicest, mellowest guys, but they like to sing, about crazy stuff, and so it's been a challenge in some respects, but it's really amazing to see how far they've come. I mean, they're the biggest selling death metal band of all time, which is pretty insane.
Very cool. And I think when I ran into you, it was just before the pandemic. It was in Orange County at the Santa Ana Observatory. And I was able to catch you and get a photo with you. And I had to wear this shirt because I don't know, I had a sixth sense that you would be there. So I was glad to be able to capture that moment with you. So, and Cannibal Corpse is one of the bands next to Slayer. Every time they came through, I would always try and catch them in town. Cannibal Corpse is also that band that I would try and catch every single time just because it's just so amazing to watch. And yeah, and thank you for that, Cannibal Corpse. Yeah, top
Yeah,
top
yeah,
five at least for me. Yeah, we're talking
awesome.
with Brian Slagel, Swing of the Blade, his new book out. Um, just about a month in release. How's been the reception for your new book?
Been great. I mean, it's really weird. Like doing the first book, it wasn't anything I set out to really do. Was write a book or whatever. But everybody kept bugging me about it, and it was our 35th anniversary, and I figured, well, I might as well try to tell a story while I still have some wits about me. So we did the book, and to my shock, it did extremely well. Like extremely well. Like the response was incredible. Really blew me away how great the response was and how well it did. So then, a few years later, everybody said, "Hey, what about part two?" And a lot of people were asking about, because the first book and this book as well. It's not a real long book, and I don't want. It's about a record label. It's not the most exciting thing in the world, and I'm not salacious in any of this stuff. I'm not going to tell crazy stories. But a lot of people wanted to hear, more in depth about the bands. A lot of people wanted to hear more about obscure bands. So I try to include as many of those bands in there. And the new release has been all same thing, great response. Everybody that seems to love it, and it's doing extremely well as well. At one point, I had the #1 and #2 books on Amazon's heavy metal list, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But the one funny thing is that there's still a lot of obscure bands that I didn't get to that people still want me to talk about. So, but yeah, overall, it's been great, and it's really fun to do. I finished it before the pandemic, so it just took kind of forever to get it done. Then there was a paper shortage and all these things. So I finished it almost 3 years ago, so it's finally getting out there now. We actually had to put like an extra chapter or a little bit of thing at the end, just to kind of talking about what was happening during the pandemic, just so what didn't seem out of place. But yeah, so far so good. I can't complain at all.
When you mentioned the pandemic and the writing process, I mean, was some of this written during the pandemic, and it was just as things were kind of opening up, you're still in writing
No,
mode, or
it was completely written before the pandemic. Everything I
really?
really
Wow.
literally finished it probably February or March of 2020, and then the
Oh,
pandemic hit, and then of course that caused a pretty massive delay. And while that was
sure.
happening, my co-writer Mark Eglinton, who's amazing, said, "Hey, we should probably put something in here just to talk about kind of what went on and how things were going." So there's a little bit at the end of the book, kind of talking about what went on from our perspective and how things were going there. But yeah, everything was finished before then. And then we're trying to get it out for the 40th anniversary, which was last year. But again, the paper shortage hit. So it's
Yeah,
finally come out in May. So here we
yeah.
are.
You did mention though that like I hate to say it this way, but so because it surprised me that 2020 ended up being like one of your most successful years, right?
Yeah, it's from both 2020 and 2021, which was really a shock because, of course, when this thing first happened, we were shut down for about 3.5 months, so we didn't know
Mhm.
what was going to happen.
Right.
Then coming back in, I kind of had a feeling, but I was you were just so happy. The fans are so incredible, and what happened was, they obviously couldn't go to concerts, and they couldn't leave
Yeah.
their house.
Mhm.
So a lot of people sat and listened to music, and
Right.
anything we made physically, whether it was vinyl, obviously, or CDs. I mean, we sold out of everything, and the response was just incredible from the fans, and also just streaming online and everything. And I think that it was, and for the band's credits too, and again, the fans with the bands, they bought every piece of merchandise that these bands had. And I was talking to, I think it was Cattle Decapitation, who was going to go out on the road right at that time, and they'd
Hmm.
made all their merchandise, and like, we don't know what's going to happen here with all this merch. They told me that they sold more merchandise that year than any time they've ever been on the road. So again, the fans were
Wow.
so incredible, but between buying all the merchandise and the physical product, and getting subscriptions to digital, whatever, however they could support the bands, they did. And that was a huge help to everybody, because it was, it wasn't easy, especially for the bands, to not be able to tour
Mhm.
for 2 to 3 years. I mean, that's where they make the bulk of their money. So
Mhm.
so it was good that we were able to help them a little bit, and that's all credit to the fans.
Yeah, and you mentioned Cattle Decapitation, another band who has a legacy with Metal Blade. I just talked to Josh like not too long ago, and talking about the new album Terracite, and right now they're on the road with Dark Funeral for the Decibel Magazine tour. They're gonna be here in LA, I think, this coming Saturday, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm trying to make it up to that one. And talking Brian Slagel, the brains behind Metal Blade and just metal as a whole. I appreciate your time. We have a few minutes left before Zoom kicks us off here, and like there's so much still I want to cover, man. Like I've been looking forward to this conversation with you for a long time, just to pick your brain because I will give you like high horns and the credit here because you're a prime example of why I love what I do. I think being that you're not really the musician, but you've been behind the scenes and you've been a fan. The most important thing is the fans, and both fans and musicians, I think, need to understand this. It's like you need to give back to the community. You need to give back to the metal scene that you're trying to be a part of. You're trying to get some recognition. You're trying to get people to your shows. You're trying to get people to buy your merch and albums. Give back to the scene. Like, what do you have to offer the scene? Am I right?
Oh, 100%. I mean, but I think the thing about our world, and it was one of the many reasons why I love it, is that everybody's a fan. Like,
Mhm.
everybody, whether you're in a band or you work at a label or you work at NAC or, you work at a magazine or whatever you're doing, everybody's a fan. And we're all instantly connected by that. So that's such a big thing because you don't, so many other industries, people are doing it and they're not really interested in what they're doing, or they don't really have a passion for it. Where in our world, pretty much everybody does. And we all grew up as fans. And I think that what kind of bonds everybody together, and especially with the bands, because it's so much fun for me to go out and, just hang out with them. And we talk half the time, we're just talking music,
Yeah.
what,
Yeah.
old music, new music, whatever.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah.
or sports if they're into sports, which not a lot of them are, but some of them are.
Raiders, Raiders right here. Raiders all
There you
day.
go.
That's right. Shout out to my homeboy Omar too, another metalhead, my brother. Um, and so let's kind of with that, with bands or people that support the metal scene. Let's talk Trevor Strnad. Um, he I feel was kind of the face of like modern metal that would help promote a lot of underground bands. And how was your relationship? Tell us a little bit about Trevor.
That's always a tough one.
Yeah,
One of the best people I ever met in my entire life. Just a phenomenal human being, and always happy, and always great. And a monstrous music fan. I mean, he was
yeah,
way more into it, I think, even than I was in the early days. I mean,
mm,
that was his lifeblood was finding bands. And I told him a couple of times, I said, dude, you're doing all this stuff, do you want to like do an A&R thing or have a label? And he's like, no, he just wanted to be a fan, didn't want any of
wow,
the other stuff, didn't want to deal with the business of anything. He just wanted to be
mm,
a fan.
wow,
And just a phenomenal human being. I mean, every time you're around him, he's the life of the party,
mm,
always a great guy. Always got a big hug and love you, man. At
mm,
the end of hanging out with him, and it's a sad thing that happened. And I think that if there's any possible good to come out of that, is just if anybody's struggling with mental health, I know it's difficult, I know it's hard, but reach out, or if you know somebody that's struggling, reach out to them, because and even that doesn't guarantee that it's going to work. But and Trevor was very open about his mental health issues, and yeah, it's really sad that he left us way too early. But
way too early, man.
yeah, it just so I was talking to somebody, and the cliche, bright stars burn out fast, or they only last whatever how long. That's kind of what Trevor was. He was a very bright star for sure.
Totally, and I will say this, to you directly. My condolences to you, and I know you guys had a bond. And yeah, that's one of the things I really respected about him, besides being an amazing frontman and watching him, and
Yeah.
his respect for the underground and trying to support that. And you know, we keep that alive. This is why I do what I do with KNAC, like bringing up spotlight to like the lesser known bands, the heavier bands on the side of things, because this is what I grew up with, and this is what I enjoy, and I'm trying to give back as much as possible.
We all
Brian,
appreciate that, by the way.
cheers to you, man. Brian Slagel, the brains behind Metal Blade Records. We're talking Swing of the Blade. We still have a few minutes left. Let's turn the page now, pun intended, to Slayer. Back in the day, what was it that kind of stuck out to you and made you think these guys have a future. I'm going to sign these guys. Let's get in the room with them and have this conversation.
Well, I saw them the first time I saw them. Famous story. They opened for Bitch, and they were out in Orange County, and they went out there early because there was a lot of bands in Orange County. And where I lived, it was about 45 minutes to an hour away, depending upon traffic. So I went out early to see these bands. I didn't know who they were. I had no idea. I thought the name was cool, and they came out and they were phenomenal. They played about half covers and half originals, but they were incredible. So I went back and they had a manager at the time. I said, "Hey, I'm Brian Slagel. I do these metal massacres." They said, "Yeah, we know. We would love to be on one." I said, "Well, I'd love to have you on one." And then, that led to, seeing them a couple more times, talking to them, and they had some more material. And it's like, let's do an album. And being in the studio with them, we're all young kids at that time. They're 18, 19. I was like 21, 22.
Mm-hmm.
But and I've been in the studio with a lot of bands, a lot of great bands. But there's something magical about those guys, that just being there and what they were creating at such a young age, and how good it was, and how easy it was for them. I mean, we only had like 10 days to record that record because we had hardly any money to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was done fast, and it sounded great for what we did. It's obviously, Show No Mercy, classic now.
Mercy.
But it just felt something special was going on with these guys, and then you see them live, and it's a weird thing because they're all four very different personalities, and they don't necessarily all get along really that well. But you put them on stage, and it was just absolute magic.
Totally.
Something there that was just incredible. And seeing them between the live stuff and putting out the records, I was telling everybody that I knew back then, like, these guys are going to be big. Like, they're going to be big. And sure enough, they are. And still good friends with them. And Kerry King is my seatmate at the Raider games here.
I saw that,
He's the reason why I have season tickets. Like, I'm a big football fan. I wasn't necessarily a Raider fan, but Kerry's such a huge fan, and we've met a few of the guys who work for the Raiders who are big metalheads, so that helps.
That's awesome. Yeah, Raiders, silver and black, and metal just seem to go hand in hand, and I think Slayer has a big responsibility having to do with that. And you are a hockey fan, though. Are you a Vegas Knight? Because I think before you were a Kings fan, right?
Yeah, I mean, I had season tickets to the Kings, so I was a Kings fan forever. But when I moved out here, one of the reasons I ended up moving here was, because they had a hockey team. So I didn't know they were going to be that good. But here we are 6 years in, and they've been in the Stanley Cup Finals twice. So I'm going tonight.
Yeah, they won the finals the first year, right?
First year they went to the finals, which is just completely nuts, completely nuts. Like nothing like that has ever happened before. But here we are 6 years later, they're back in the finals again. So
nice.
As a hockey fan, these weeks for me are really fun because a bunch of people I know with NHL or big metalheads come into town, and going to the games is fun. So yeah, I'll be there tonight.
Right on. Maybe people listening to this, well, actually, by the time this gets posted, it'll be after the fact. And who knows, maybe they'll have the cup to display. But
if there's a game 5, I'll be there too. So
right on. We have a few more minutes left. I did want to ask, you captured the magic with Bill Metoyer, another bud that I know out here in Los Angeles. And any brief stories about Bill?
Oh, well, Bill was an instrumental part of Metal Blade. I mean, I don't know that we would have been able to do what we did without him, because he was an engineer that was a metalhead, and he provided us a studio that we could work in that wasn't crazy expensive. I mean, we'd have to work overnight or whatever. But, if we didn't have that opportunity, I mean, I don't know that, Armored Saint or Slayer or, a lot of these bands would have existed, because, I had no money. None of us had any money. So trying to get a proper studio together would be impossible. And on top of that, an engineer who actually knew how to make heavy metal, make it sound great. So he was a humongous part of the early days of Metal Blade. Like I said, it wasn't for him, who knows? It would have been much more difficult, that's for sure. He made it a lot easier. Legendary guy, and it was part of all that early, Trouble, Slayer, Fate's Warning, on and on and on.
Yeah. Salutes to Bill Metoyer. Shout out to him. He's a good guy.
Yes.
What I was going to ask is, like, okay, Slayer was a home run. Like, was there ever a band that you had your sights on that you thought had promise and then just fell, didn't make it?
I mean, there's a ton of those, and that's kind of what we talk about, or I talk a lot about in the new book about that sort of stuff is, because people are asking me, like, what happened? Why did this band not make it? Why did that band not make it? And it always comes down to, almost every time, there's some factor that isn't right. And to be, like, I make the analogy, to be successful, you've got to have the manager, the agent, the lawyer, the band, everybody's got to be the label. We all have to be on the same page. If you've got four tires on a car and they're all moving in the same direction, you're going to real fast. One's not moving in the right direction and they're moving too slowly, you're not going anywhere. And that's really the case with music. Like, not only do you have to be a really good musician and be in a really good band, but then you have to have all these other factors have to come in perfectly. Why is Metallica one of the biggest bands in the world? Because everybody they're surrounded by are first class, wonderful people, and they know what they're doing, and that's how they become successful. And there are a lot of other great bands out there that should have been a lot bigger, but that weren't. It's always that case. Either the label was wrong, the manager was wrong, there's something in the band was wrong. There's always one of these outside factors that come into play that just causes them not to. I mean, you can make a phenomenal record. There's so many bands that we've done over the years that made great records with that just didn't go anywhere because the everything just didn't align for them to make it work. There's a band just off the top of my head called Celador that I loved in the early '90s. It was kind of like Dragon Force-ish, I guess, but very, very progressive metal, and a really amazing guitar player, really phenomenal singer. They're from the middle of nowhere in Omaha, Nebraska, but they made a phenomenal record, but they just didn't have anything else. They didn't have any other factors, and it just didn't do nearly as well as we hoped it would.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, Brian. I really appreciate your time. I wish we could have more time to talk, and maybe we'll have a part two sometime in the future.
Yeah,
I appreciate your
we
time.
we can always do part two.
I'm all right. Cool. Let's do that. Swing of the Blade, Metal Blade Records, Brian Slagel. Cheers, buddy.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks.